really grateful for you showing up today. I know that time is a precious resource, and I'm sure a lot of us have things going on that we could be doing other than this. So appreciate you spending your time here today. I'm excited to be here wearing a few hats as president and co-founder of Carbon A-List and Cal Consulting, and working across the ecosystem of applying for federal fund or different funding sources to drive action in soil health, as well as being on the program administration side, where we actually have funding and we're trying to figure out how to allocate it. And across this work, a lot of sticky and difficult conversations come up, a lot of learning gaps that we may have or we may see across the network and ecosystem. And I couldn't be happier to do this deep dive today with Patrick Smith, who is a founder of a new nonprofit called Soil Upside, as well as a member of a network we've had going on for about 6 months called Trail Pass. And the way that Patrick, I think, looks at the world is interesting and important. And the hope in today's meeting is we'll hear a bit of a presentation from him, then dive into 4 breakout rooms, then come back together and share what we learned about. And with that, I will pass it over to Patrick.
Thanks, Christoph. So wonderful to this work that's in process right now. I want to confirm that you all can see my slides.
We see them not from presenter layout. Maybe.
And how about now? Is it presenter layout now?
Not yet.
Not yet? Well, let's see here. I think we're just going to have to go with the flow with what we got here. So, yeah, Christoph asked me to do to host a conversation about the landscape of soil health incentives. These are incentives, economic incentives in particular, for producers to implement soil health practices on farm. Really critical moment, economic moment that we'll talk about in just a second. Now, I've been traveling.
Wait, Patrick, I'm
Yep.
sorry to interrupt. I totally
Yep.
forgot to do my one job, which was to ask everyone who's here, if you could please share in the chat your name, your location, and explain what it is that you do to a 5-year-old, or to a 5th grader, rather, like in a sentence or two. I think that will be really helpful. Sorry about the interruption, Patrick.
That's okay. It's a good prompt for me too. I'll just say briefly, at Soil Upside, we're trying to make it easier for farmers to access funding. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the incentive landscape, and I want to share some of my thinking with you all today, and then have you go and beat it up and improve it and add a little more nuance, hopefully, in the breakout rooms. So in the last couple of years, I've been traveling throughout the US, talking to producers in various production systems, cropping systems, and invariably the thing that I hear is, where's the compensation for this? We're already taking so much risk. How do we get the economic piece to actually back this up? Now, there's a really compelling business case for producers, long-term business case of increased profitability. And this is, upheld by multiple studies. There's case studies with growers, conversations with growers that have successfully made this transition. On this slide, the study that is represented there is one from BCG and a couple other organizations of wheat farmers in Kansas. But the kicker is that in the short term, there are real challenges in implementing this as producers are coming up the learning curve and making the transition of investing in additional assets and potentially taking yield and profitability hits. Now, I've talked to lots of agronomists, not lots, several agronomists, and even some producers who don't necessarily agree that there is a yield drag and that there's profitability drag in the short term. But in general, this is what we hear and what the studies have shown. Now, this chart is actually a little confusing because there's lots of stuff going on here, but it shows actually a double whammy. The dark green is projected wheat prices. So as we see commodities taking a hit and bottoming out, and you see producers being asked to transition at a moment when the commodity prices are being affected. That is very, very difficult. Now, what do producers think about this? Just the other day, there's this amazing post on LinkedIn from Callie Noland, a cotton farmer in the Delta, and she really laid out all of the significant factors here that are pressures on producers transitioning. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but at the end of the day, what this is really supporting is that the downside protection that we have, the federal government provides to conventional growers, is not there for producers that are trying to transition and implement regenerative ag and soil health. Now, I should also note that this points to a couple of the other key barriers that producers face, both social pressure and social dynamics and technical assistance. But really, at the end of the day, dollars and capital is one of the major forces here. She says farmers need support, we need financing, we need partners. Financing is really what backs that partnership up. Now, the challenge is that the incentive landscape is disaggregated, really complex, very, very difficult to navigate for producers. And it's very difficult for those of us that are looking at it and trying to help producers make sense of. So what I'm really hoping that we can do today is all of us share mental models that we have around the incentive landscape, and that we can collectively be better, and we can have a better foundation for putting together a system to help growers access these incentives. So I want to share a framework and a mental model that has been developing for me. This is early, it's incomplete, there's things that are missing. Please, in the breakout rooms, tell us what's missing. Please drop your mental models in the chat and help us collectively improve. So the way that I've been thinking about this is along a maturity framework. We have all the way from notional incentives. These are incentives that could actually be really, really impactful, but there's actually no capital that's being deployed to them right now, all the way up to demonstrated, and there's billions of dollars that are flowing through there. So I want to talk about each one of these a little bit, and then we'll dive into the weeds of hopefully improving this. The first thing we're going to talk about is the notional pieces. Now, these two in particular, land value appreciation and nutritional density premiums, are deep systems impact. So nutritional density premiums, I'll just talk about that for a moment. There's a lot of variables that are involved in this. The science is really early. There's a lot of things that happen in the value chain that may or may not affect them. So we're not going to go into too much detail there. But I would say that major private investors, I was just talking to a couple of folks at Catterton on Monday. This is the big private equity firm. They're looking at this very closely. And there's billions of dollars that are waiting in the wings around nutritional density potentially. Land value appreciation, there's already a precedent with the Iowa Corn Suitability Rating. It's CSR2 is what it's called, to connect productivity of land to the land values themselves. So if there are frameworks around risk and resiliency that show that property that actually has implemented soil health and things like improved water infiltration rate, that actually impacts the productivity of that land, then you can imagine the cascading effects of across land value, across mortgage rates, across insurance rates, real asset investment models change. It's really potentially huge. And there are already companies, Aqua Oso is one, that are working on providing risk and resiliency measures for specific properties. On the promising side, this is where we see early indications of capital, and you can see the concrete mechanisms that are being developed, but there's not actually any capital being deployed there yet. Federal tax credits for low carbon intensity commodities is probably the biggest one here, at least for the moment. This is 45Z and 40B, the tax credit provisions that are coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it has the potential to provide significant amounts of additional capital to growers. Many of you know Mitchell Hora, the sort of chief evangelist for federal tax credits, 45Z in particular, for corn and ethanol production. And in his estimation, it can be worth hundreds of dollars an acre to growers to implement low carbon intensity or to produce low carbon intensity crops from implementing soil health practices. On the emergent side, I want to spend a separate slide just talking about these because there's so much that's happening here. So let's dive into this in a little bit more detail. There's a lot that's happening across the entire decarbonization of supply chains. This is ecosystem asset programs. This means carbon and water in particular, mostly carbon, both offsets and insets. Most of these ecosystem asset programs and providers, many of them started as offset providers, and they've transitioned into insetting. Insetting is this next category where it is companies that are trying to decarbonize their own supply chain, as opposed to offsets where they're purchasing carbon credits to offset the emissions of their company. This is, a very small representation of the companies that have insetting programs going on. I was just talking to an insetting project developer the other day who placed $22 million of insetting revenue with growers last year in 2023, and he's expecting to either double or triple that this upcoming year. So there's real capital already flowing through these programs. And then certification premiums. These are 5 of the emerging ones. A couple of these we're already showing, and what I'm hearing is that there's premiums that are coming from these. I haven't seen any research on this yet, but the sort of like on the ground word of mouth is that there are actually premiums that are coming from some of the certifications early. Now, we may have some folks on the call that can contribute some more information there. Then there's a whole category, the lending category. There's early, both in mortgages and operating loans with FBN and Mad Capital officially. FBN they started with a $25 million pool last year. They've increased that to $50 million this year. Mad Capital just raised a second fund, which is a $50 million fund. One of the big differences between the two, Mad is focused on regen organic crops, and FBN is, I think, open to any growers in any cropping systems. I've also heard that Wells Fargo has a product that they're about to release around this. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't have the details on that. So again, that's more word of mouth, but emerging. Then the next 3 categories, agroforestry, agrivoltaics, and rural wind power, you can kind of think about this as maximizing land use. So whether that's integrating trees into cropping systems in some way through agroforestry, or using it for energy generation, using property for energy generation with agrivoltaics or rural wind power, many times that can include incorporating cropping into the power production projects. There are a couple goat agrivoltaic projects that I'm aware of, sheep agrivoltaic projects. And so there's all of these things that growers are facing when they're trying to figure out, okay, there's capital starting to flow. How do I find the ones that are applicable to me, and how much is this going to be worth to me? I would also point out that this categorization is totally insufficient. So, for example, Pachima and World Tree under agroforestry are also ecosystem asset programs, so they have carbon credit elements to them. All these Invenergy, NextEra, and EDF are doing both agrivoltaics and wind. So and of course, we've already talked about the ecosystem asset programs, and insetting programs are really starting to blend together also. So there's a lot of dynamism in this space right now, and trying to sort out where the capital is flowing. The last category that I would talk about here is the demonstrated, where we actually have real like billions of dollars that are flowing. This is federal, state, and local public money primarily, but we do also have conservation easements and philanthropic capital in this category. And let's dig in on the federal grant and cost share programs for a moment, because this is another area that just demonstrates the amount of potential sources of dollars that are coming, that are available for growers. Of course, Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, but inside that, there's 141 different potential programs. You have NRCS and EQIP and RCPP, where there's a lot of activity. And there's, I think a big push right now with RCPP programs. And then of course, across all these other categories, value-added producer grants, REAP grants for energy projects on farm. You have FAIR, which is a project under NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Ag. So there's all these different sources of incentives in the USDA, and then in other departments, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, Department of Interior in particular, there are grant programs that are not specifically for ag, but could very well be applicable to ag and drive rural development, for example, with regenerative ag as a centerpiece. So that's the high level sort of sketch of the mental model for me that's been developing around a lot of these incentive programs. Christoph has put together a three-dimensional grid for us to talk about along the accessibility of these incentives, the maturity of them, and the size. This is the framework that we're going to use in the breakout rooms. Now, this may or may not be applicable. If you guys think there's a better way to think about these, if you think about them differently, if there's a piece of them that you want to expand and build out a more nuanced version of that, please absolutely do that. I would really welcome it. So time to jump into the conversation. I don't know, Christoph, if there's anything you want to add before we do breakout rooms?
I just want to applaud you for packing dense information into 15 minutes or less. Really well done, Patrick. Because Patrick was so concise, I think we do have a little bit of time to, if there's any questions in this full forum before we dive into the breakout rooms. I would add, for each of these opportunities, what we hope to get into is some of the context that speaks to the challenges and opportunities around these different, specific incentive funding streams that we might want to discuss. And the value of, again, having 4 recorded breakout rooms. You can all go back. It's kind of luck of the draw where you end up, but it may end up that we do talk around different incentives. So I'd be most curious to hear, especially on this call, from Patrick's list, what feels like it's most bubbling up to the top. But want to make sure if there are any questions, they go to Patrick. So, and you can use the hand raise function right here if you'd like to be called on. Go ahead, Mark. You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, rookie mistake. The lead time on some of the federal programs to get the funding and conservation implemented is an issue for farmers. It doesn't often meet with the way they do business, their planning cycle, blah, 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 right? They don't want to wait 2 or 3 years to finally get something on the ground. So that's maybe something just to mention.
Yeah, I think timing is a big issue. I think stacking these programs is a big issue. Like how do you participate in one and potentially more than one? There's oftentimes requirements that are conflicting either implicitly or explicitly. So that's another piece for a lot of the funding for sure. One of the things that I would say is that the disaggregated nature of these incentives, while theoretically there's billions of dollars on the table, and I would also say this is important to mention. So Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, there was $3 billion allocated for that. Also, as part of the IRA, there's an additional $20 billion on top of the normal program budgets to flow through some of these traditional USDA programs. That's one of the reasons why the RCPP is, I think, really pushing for their grants right now and their programs right now. But there's a lot of capital that's flowing through a system that's already resource constrained by people, resource constrained by local FSA offices and FSA agents that may or may not be up to speed on all of the potential opportunities that are available and requirements and eligibility. So there's it's theoretically you have these billions of dollars available, but the structure, this disaggregated structure, is of itself a disincentive for growers for adoption, and it has a dampening effect. So that's really what we're focused on at Soil Upside, is how can we help make sense of these and simplify them, or at least aggregate them, to improve the navigation and the adoption of them. So. Amanda, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I wonder if organization of the soil incentives as you have it could include, or at some point include, crop sector or category, so you can see like which crops are deficient, underfunded, specialty crops, fruit and vegetables versus commodity grains.
Yeah, it's a great question. So to answer that in two ways, with Soil Upside, absolutely, we're going to be collecting data on crops and regions and all of the things that are applicable there. And ultimately, we want to build out a geospatial interface so producers can upload shape files and see which programs are applicable to them, whether that's public or commercial or philanthropic. And there's also, and I think you're getting at a sort of second layer there, which is an analytical layer. So if we look at the aggregated programs, how do we do gap analysis on funding? How do we identify some of the structural mismatches and issues? That's something that we're looking at as well, for sure. I'm happy to talk in detail about what we're thinking about with Soil Upside. What I would love to get from this group is your input on how you think about the incentives writ large, because again, I think having a really good framework is what we need as a first step, not as a first step, but as one of the steps to help us facilitate adoption and get these more accessible for growers. So Christoph, do we want to jump into the breakout rooms?
Yeah, so the facilitators will take you through rapid intros so people can know who's in the room, and then we'll dive into some of the discussion. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms now, and we'll be there for about 20 minutes.
Vineyards, saves them money, and delivers a whole bunch of ecosystem benefits. The Vinidor side of the operation quantifies those benefits. We use machine learning techniques on remote imaging and ground truth data to radically reduce the amount of energy and cost that has to go into measuring the change in soil organic carbon as a result of putting perennial no-till cover cropping systems in place.
Thank you.
And we are one of on the Oakville side. We're one of those climate smart commodities grantees, and we have a subsidy program or an incentive program through that grant for growers to get started with the cover crop.
Awesome. Sammy, could you go next, please?
Yeah, hello everyone. It's awesome to be here with you. My name is Sammy Telleton. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I'm one of the co-founders and the COO at FarmRaise. We are an ag tech company that builds software to help farmers master their farm finances. We help not only with the paperwork and enrollment support piece for financial incentive programs, but also with farm accounting software that is super simple and farm specific. And we also work with funders, so folks that have USDA Climate Smart Commodity Grants, RCPPs, to build and deploy the entire grower-facing enrollment platform and facilitate grower paperwork. Last thing I'll say, last week we just announced our official cooperatorship with the USDA Farm Service Agency, and we're building out a series of free modules online for farmers that want to access FSA programs but don't really know how. So definitely check that out, and if you know any farmers that might benefit from it, please direct them that way. Thank you.
Thanks, Sammy. I just want to tip my hat to you to say I live in a small valley where farmers have told me about their farm raised profile and how useful it is. So you've hit commercial viability in my book. over to Nick.
Hey everyone, awesome group here. So glad to be here. Nick Renke, CEO of Habitaire. At Habitaire, we're doing scalable biogeochemical modeling. So process-based modeling to do the MRV side of things and hopefully make these climate smart commodity markets scalable and kind of reduce that data burden on farmers. So these things actually have a chance of getting the targets that we're trying to get to. So we're on a couple of climate smart commodities grants and just always looking to collaborate with folks like yourselves and how we can all do this better.
Thank you. Let's go to Raviv next.
Hi guys, Raviv here. Great to see so many Coloradans on the call. I'm based in Boulder. I lead a nonprofit organization called the Nature Tech Collective. We bring over 130 now organizations that measure nature, so carbon, water, soil, biodiversity, and then on the demand side, we work with financial institutions, banks, insurance companies on their MRV needs. So glad to see some MRV folks here. And Nick had a call with Ben that speaks highly of you, Ben Adolf, and Emma Fuller and Ledcor. We specifically now leading a working group on region ag insurance, which is so missing in the industry. I don't know, for those of you following the RFSI, we published an article on why USDA crop insurance is broken and de-incentivize farmers to transition. So we're working to change that and working on a pilot with Aon specifically around the region ag for insurance, applying MRV for insurance.
Fascinating. I have so many questions for you, but I'll probably save them for another time. Over to Jeffrey.
Hey all, yeah, great to be here. I already got some bunch of follow-ups I want to do. My name's Jeff Boss. I'm also wearing two hats. One is an executive member on the Soil and Climate Initiative out of Green America. We're a farm-to-shelf holistic regenerative agriculture program for farmers, no matter where they are on their regenerative journey. And we're excited. We just have our first verified products in market, which we launched at Expo West last month. And I'm also facilitating a community of practice focused on organic and regenerative transition for sustainability leaders from a range of CPGs through the Climate Collaborative, and also connected with Patrick in all kinds of different ways. So that's why I'm here. And yeah, really excited to be hearing more about ways of reducing data burdens with farmers. We're a farmer-oriented program. We are finding ways for this to work for farmers, and man, do they hate filling out forms. So anything we can do to reduce that burden and reduce the evidence burden that they have to collect to prove that they're actually doing the stuff they're already doing is great. So I'm going to be following up, whether you like it or not, with a couple of you. So happy to be here. Thanks.
All right, and that leaves Mitchell. Thank you, Jeff.
Hey everyone, Mitchell. I literally just pulled up to the farm. We're planting corn into our cover crop. Hopefully you guys can see some of that. I'm based in Southeast Iowa, Continuum Ag software, specifically helping farmers get their carbon intensity scores and get those verified on a field level. But I got to help Dad, but I'm listening in.
All right, so we know when Mitchell comes back on and has something to say, it's very important, so we should listen. So I'm gonna synthesize a little bit what I thought I heard in terms of both challenges and opportunities. I heard challenges in terms of the data burden to enroll into programs is kind of a big theme. And I heard, well, Raviv provided, but he put BRB, so I'm not sure if Raviv you're hearing this, but quite a few opportunities in terms of the data unlock to drive different incentives in insurance, which was one of the more nascent opportunities that Patrick showed. But beyond that, I heard, yeah, grant programs as well fit in that camp, specific to the Commodity Credit Corporation's effort with the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. But there are other opportunities that we're aware of that we want to kind of dig into with this illustrious group of folks.
Christoph, when you say opportunities, you're talking about primarily the revenue sources for farmers?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking Jerry Maguire, show me the money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Show me the money, and so which money opportunity do we want to dig into as this group to talk about both its level of maturity and then its level of accessibility. And so by making this framework in this way, we thought it would be useful to dive in and see, okay, what comes up, and in so doing, we kind of place it on a list. Personally, I'd rather not share my screen, but I've got a Miro board in the background where I could. What I'm going to be doing is putting stickies and kind of capturing notes along the way.
Well, the one thing I can share from our recent work with vineyards is that they go back and forth in the vineyard 7 times over the course of the season to prepare a seed bed, plant the annual cover crop, fertilize it, mow it multiple times, and then finally they till it to get it out of the way before harvest. And if they switch to the perennial cover crop, once that's established, that goes from 7 to 0. And so the economic proposition for them is a layup, really. It does take some work to get it established, and we're still learning what it takes to get it established. One of the things that's a little conflicting is that the vineyard management companies have clients who don't want to use any herbicide, but we need about 2 to 3 years of weed suppression once you put in the cover crop to get it a good thick stand established, and then it doesn't need any more help. So you have to be a little flexible, right? If you're purist about this, you're going to make your life very difficult, and you're going to end up doing a lot of back and forth. We also got to get them out of the habit of leaving bare dirt under the vine rows. It's just not necessary. It's just a lost opportunity, and then they have to go figure out how to suppress weeds there without the work that the cover crop's doing. So that one's really straightforward on an ROI basis, and if you throw in a little carbon credit revenue on top, it's even better. But it's a little harder for the almond growers. The cost change from what they're presently doing isn't nearly as high. They do a fair amount of mowing just to defeat resident vegetation and keep the soil clean and bare. So for them, the carbon credit revenue is essential because, what's happened with their prices too. Their revenue per acre has fallen in half. So giving them opportunities to reduce their cost structure a little bit, and maybe $80 an acre, and add some carbon credit revenue in on top. And this is the key for them. Someone was talking about, I think it was you, Chris, so they don't like to fill out forms. Yeah. So the benefit of the monitoring service is that they don't have to do anything. The soil carbon gets measured for them. The baseline gets measured for them through the USDA grant. And then the service monitors the change. And it allows us, because we can see down to the acre or the field, we can see what's happening. So if someone were to switch out of the practice, we'd know it. Our algorithms catch that as an exception. And we are calibrating the models. And now we're within 95% of the fields, we are within 10% of the ground truth version, one measurement captured by the analytical chemistry lab at UC Davis, for example. But that comes.
So Jeff, I'm sorry to cut you off. I appreciate the exposure we're all getting to your work, but I want to abstract it out so that we can have more of a discussion. So maybe just to pause and hear from anyone else, and I'll try to summarize what I'm hearing you say. Actually, the opportunity you're pointing to sounds to me as if it's a carbon credit revenue generating opportunity for farmers that's actually backed by the USDA. So the USDA's effort is taking on a lot of that risk, which is an interesting tweak, an interesting nuance.
Yeah.
So I'm curious kind of in that lens, and to hear from others' perspectives of some of the incentive opportunities. Sammy, not to put you on the spot, but I'd be thrilled to hear from how it's going at Farm Raise, and even some of the challenges, and getting to this question around maturity and accessibility. given that very tech illiterate farmers are on FarmRaise, I'm like, man, there's something that is accessible here. But yeah, curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. We are seeing that the technology that we've put out is simple enough for most farmers, regardless of their familiarity with web apps and mobile apps, etc., that most farmers are able to use pretty successfully. But it is so imperative to have a technical support team, both in terms technical support in terms of using the app, like having people that farmers can call or video chat with while they're going through things. And also having, I think, Jeff, you were alluding to some of this and what you were saying too, like having on the ground technical support to implement the practices. The other thing that we have learned is that this goes back to farmer record keeping. It's why we built the accounting app. The process of like verifying that you've done the practice and getting, for a lot of the USDA grants, it's reimbursement basis. So we've actually, that process can be a little bit like disorganized and hairy for farmers. So you're able with the app to, it works offline, to snap pictures of like the cover crop seed tag in the field or the cover crop going in or your invoice or receipt that proves that you've done the conservation practice. And then you can upload that via the app to the funder and like have that be not, it's not verifying like a carbon credit or any type of ecosystem benefit, right? But it's verifying that the farmer's done the work and should get paid for that work. So that those have been some of like the big learnings is like offline capability, always have a human available to support farmers in using the app, always have a plan for technical support with implementation as well. And most farmers, I think, are really open to government funding despite some of the stigmas around like what that might mean. It just takes a little bit of explaining what they're on the hook for and like what the consequences are if they mess up or don't end up doing something. And usually you can dispel anxiety there. So those are a few rambling thoughts. If you have any other directed questions, I'm happy to share more there too.
Yeah, I think I captured it with, you know, the challenges across different incentive programs on the record keeping and some of the issues there. I'm still unclear. I'm just plain dumb because what's the opportunity, you know, in Nick or Adam, from where you see it? You're devising strategies, you're figuring out enrollment pathways to try to engage farmers under the premise of creating some type of positive environmental outcome. But where are you seeing that lever being most effective in your work?
Take a shot at that. Yeah. I'm really interested in the supply chain decarbonization side of things, much more than probably anything to do with like carbon offsets, because you're inclusive of greenhouse gases that go beyond soil carbon. So that's where we focus a lot of our efforts. To be really blunt, though, these programs are not getting the value prop right for farmers yet. It's not enough of an incentive. They're really confusing. There are too many different ones out there that all sound a little bit different, but it's hard to understand why. And farmers are just getting absolutely carpet bombed by these things. So we're trying to figure out how we can simplify and sort of decrease the data burden, decrease the cost of physical measurement with better modeling while still, you know, making sure we maintain credibility in the marketplace. So ideally, if we're doing our job right, it's creating a marketplace that actually has value, but also reducing a lot of the barriers to make it work. So I'd say we're a little ways off from this market being a super exciting financial opportunity for farmers, but I think there's a lot of people going in the right direction on it. So scope 3 is what I'm really interested in, but also interested in the biofuel side of things. But I think there's an awful lot to be figured out there as to how compensation makes it back to the farmer there as well.
Great. Is it fair to characterize scope 3 decarbonization as a large opportunity, but relatively immature and inaccessible currently?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say inaccessible with all the different programs that are out there. Inconvenient to access, is that the same as inaccessible? Because I'd say they're very accessible.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
Ease of access is probably a better way to say it.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Nick. I think the ability for the large corporates, yours truly, to drive that access back to the farm, that's what we want. And again, where we've tried to leverage our suppliers who already have programs deployed. And so MRV partners selected, processes are selected, regions, farmers, because they have the relationship with the farm, right? We don't. So where we're able to, we've tapped into those projects and programs and just enhance them with our finances, basically. Now, that being said, we have a lot of suppliers, a lot of different opinions about how the world of carbon should look. And sometimes our philosophy doesn't line up with our suppliers, and we have to operate outside of our suppliers. And so we do create and execute programs outside of our suppliers, still in our supply sheds and in the ingredients that we purchase. So certainly Nick has got it exactly right that it is. I don't envy the farmer getting the sales pitch every 3 minutes from carbon jockey ABC coming up the laneway, because I think that's the very real world out there, and we are the cause of it, but also got to hit our targets in the timeframes we've got. Bit of a conundrum.
Thanks, Adam. Raviv, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I had to take care of something here at the house, so I missed some of that, but I saw Sammy's comment on the farmers getting paid for the data. That's a part of the infrastructure we're building for the insurance. And the idea is to create sorts of like a data co-op. My background, by the way, is working with big data and building those kind of infrastructures where you submit one, but then farmers are always in control of the data. So it's permission-based and consent-based. That companies that want to offer, incentives, or CPGs that want to, add farmers to their region programs would actually ping that database, get a consent. Farmers would get notification and give consent on a case-by-case basis. Plus, for the insurance use case, the idea that if farmers' data is being used for the risk modeling here, for the transition to region ag, then farmers getting paid for the use of the data. Which leads me to the second question I have for Adam, representing Mars here on the call, is what we are looking at building with Aon and the insurance companies, basically around CPGs and supply chains, where there is some off-taking agreement in place for the region produce. So the cost of insurance is basically paid by that premium by the CPG. I'm curious if where Mars said, or where is your head around some kind of premium with the off-taking to cover insurance, to cover other costs for the farmers, because the farmer's not going to pay for that premium insurance for sure. So just wondering.
Yeah, knowing full well how broken the current insurance system is a gripe we often have. Unfortunately, we don't source too many unique products. And most oftentimes in the pet food side of things, we are sourcing the last possible derivative of that ingredient, whether it be an animal or a grain. So it's really tricky for the insurance system, a different insurance system, to flow all the way through appropriately for those derivatives. It's tricky. It's great work. I'm super happy somebody's working on it. But yeah, I think my hyper focus is really geared towards the practice adoption and driving our finances towards that.
So I have the unenviable position of having the keys to rip everyone out of this breakout room and back into the main room. And we're 2 minutes over when we said we would. This is a really good discussion. I did want to just show my screen really quickly to get people's hot takes. And maybe what I tried to do was capture those opportunities that surfaced in this call and color code them. So if they're green, it means they're large. If they're yellow, they're medium, if they're red, they're small. I don't think we talked about anything small. I took my best guesses. So, and I might be missing something. So I put insurance premiums came up. I put highly accessible because if it works, it could be, but I don't know, maybe it goes lower. LCFS tax credits, this probably belongs further on the maturity level. I put carbon credit revenue plus USDA and then supply chain decarbonization. Am I missing anything that came up in our discussions? Like, is there just, or should anything be moved? Because, yeah, now would be the time to chime in.
Can I do just a quick add, because it's missing from here, which is we're seeing through our program that that CPGs and their processors are willing to pay a premium for farmers transitioning through verification program. So I think we should add that. That is that model, which has worked in the past, although we got lots of challenges around it, is starting to play out. Obviously, regenerative organic certification now has kind of end-to-end sales data showing that consumers are starting to care about these things, but we're seeing it across the board. We're having conversations with all of the big and all of the little CPGs in the space that are interested in this, and at this point are wrestling with how to do this. So that's one. And the one other thing I wanted to say is just the importance of we orient towards farmers should be farming. We're asking them to farm differently, so we should. And I think someone mentioned this of just how do we make it as easy as possible, which means rather than the farmer by farmer applying for these grant opportunities, is instead actually coming together in partnerships across service providers to be able to go to the USDA, or we've gone to the BLM. We're doing kind of the first ever rangeland program in partnership with a carbon offset partner that we're now able to just approach the farmers and explain it all to them, and that we're going to the farmers and bringing them on board to a program that's been funded through these other programs. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix as well. That there are these kind of partnership unlock opportunity for us to get to that isn't just one-off farmer by farmer.
I really appreciate that call out, Adam. Maybe I close this breakout room and we all return, or if people click return. Oh, anyway, I'm going to close it. Hopefully there weren't awkward silences. While I'm blabbing, maybe I'll start with a report out and then just pass it to the other facilitators. My breakout room was really interesting. We talked around a few different dimensions of challenges and opportunities specific to incentives, and then more generally looking at general challenges of the data burden on farmers providing proof of verification, and the challenge across the board of the need for technical support and the challenges therein when that's not in place. General opportunities looking at ways that companies do want to drive value back to the farm and are looking for opportunities to do that through public and private markets beyond themselves, as well as ways to really aggregate and come together from a more cooperative structure or working across service providers. And the big opportunities we got to discuss were around insurance premiums, the crop transition premium, a little bit of discussion on LCFS tax credits, and supply chain decarbonization, and carbon credit revenue plus kind of USDA backing. I tried my best to put that in a maturity accessible graphic. The most mature was the LCFS tax credits. The most accessible to the farmer was around insurance premiums, as it makes sense, but still not that mature. I will pass it over to Max.
Wow, my report out is not gonna compare to Christoph's right there. Well done, Christoph. I struggled with the Miro board, I won't lie, but we talked in depth about carbon insetting. We touched on the carbon intensity score and the implications getting that right could do for carbon insetting, but also for other opportunities. We did talk about technical assistance and trusted advisors. how educating those folks is going to be critical to increasing accessibility of all this funding that's coming down the pike. And then we had a really fascinating conversation about a topic I don't know much about at all, which is the new EU regulations and reporting requirements that are happening next year or this year, but needing to be reported out next year, and the crazy implications of changes in that world. So those are some of the topics we covered, and I'll pass it over to Adam.
Yeah, our conversation was quite a bit different, which is great. And we really focused on a lot of the layering that is happening in the various incentive programs that are out there, going from, I think it was Adam who brought up the local jurisdiction ones that may be more accessible to farmers and other producers, versus the NRDC ones, which seem to be a little bit more opaque. And we had a fair amount of discussion around, you know, which is more accessible, which has most impact on the various pieces of the business that the farmers do, as in their supply chain.
Thanks, Adam. And was that the USDA NRCS?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
And I'll do a quick summary of our group. We had a very important reminder that incentives don't equal just subsidy payments. It's also direct economic incentives to growers. And I should have had that as an asterisk at the very beginning, but it is oftentimes we assume incentives equal subsidy payments, but we're really looking at the entire landscape of economic incentives. Another theme that we talked about was multi-stakeholder alignment, that a lot of these programs are not just about growers, and in many cases, for example, involving middle of the supply chain, can be a really effective way to recruit growers in mass. That's insetting programs. The 45Z program is another example there, where you're actually incenting the ethanol producer or the biofuel producers. So the multi-stakeholder factor, I think, is really important. Let's see. I think one of the areas of restriction is, again, the staffing challenges that we have in a lot of the agencies, both locally and federally. And I think the last thing probably worth noting is, let's see. Oh, Arthur had a suggestion on whether it's possible to group the incentive programs based on practice area, for example. So how do you identify low marginal cost if you're implementing and participating in one program to other programs that are proximal and close to that, whether that's practice-based or you know, other factors that are at work there. So those are some of the things we talked about.
Awesome. Well, we have this scheduled for an hour and want to respect everyone's time, but also know that all our wheels are spinning. And I want to offer to anyone who doesn't have a hard stop, we can go back into the VIP hour of unrecorded time to really just kind of debrief and dive into a few things. Dan Kane, thrilled to see you and banging my head against a similar wall, working on a project and thinking about like what counts for scope 3 carbon insets versus not, and how are companies even thinking about it. And these questions to me actually still are very unanswered. So we're all kind of here talking about things such as insetting, which actually doesn't mean the same thing to the same companies who are applying this, and the incentives that may be embodied within those payment structures. And so, at least for myself, because I can't immediately turn my brain on, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit to have a little bit more of a freewheeling open conversation. But otherwise, we'll stop the recording. And Patrick, do you have any final words to say for this portion of it?
Just really appreciate everybody's participation. This is a collective learning process, and I really welcome any suggestions or thoughts or engagement on this. One last thing I would offer is that I have a, I'll just put it up on the screen real quick. I have a QR code if my computer will respond quickly enough. I have a QR code if you all want to read more about what we're working on at Soil Upside. There's a document that I've written that would come up here.
Nice.
Yeah, so you can scan that QR code and read the concept note about the project. And I really welcome any feedback. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can reach me, Patrick, at soilupside.org. And really just appreciate everybody's participation.